What's going on, YouTube? You guys are tuned into yet again another QPO reaction where I'm always analyzing and satirizing the most repugnant realities of human nature, dating, and relationships, as well as dissecting the pillars of moronic fuckery that currently plague modern civilization. Let's get a dose of this shit. So I wanted to react to this video of me and Andrew engaging in some cognitive sparring over evolution because me as a scientist who has been formally educated, worked in labs, I'm a big proponent of scientific literacy, promoting scientific literacy and spreading scientific truth, helping people understand the realities about the way the world works that is anchored in the scientific method and what the scientific evidence says. And although this exchange between me and Andrew was unexpected, it was still fun. And it's not personal. You know, I got mad respect for Andrew. Andrew is one of my favorite creators on the internet, period. Love the way that he debates. However, in this instance, he was incorrect when it comes to evolution, what it is, what it does. And, you know, it's just one of these things that I want to dive into because I felt in the moment I didn't actually get a chance to elaborate on a lot of the things that, had I been more prepared to have this conversation, had I been more prepared to engage in this back and forth, I would have been able to elucidate more accurately and, you know, give a lot more evidence and examples of some of the things that were called into question regarding evolution. But shout out to Andrew and his family. I hope they're doing well. I hope they continue to be blessed. But I'm a scientist. I love evolution. I travel all over the U.S. I visit different science museums. My university is actually the university that owns the Science Museum here in Philadelphia, Drexel University, Drexel Academy of Sciences. And so I used to be there 24/7. You know, I've been behind the scenes. I've seen real fossils. I've engaged in a lot of evolutionary work behind the scenes with professors and things like that. It's a really, really fun and, in my opinion, the most intriguing scientific theory that there is, because everything that we have, all of this life on Earth, can only be understood through the lens of evolution. It only makes sense through the lens of evolution. And that's what makes it so fascinating to me. I am just obsessed with how much diversity of life and adaptations and how things, you know, phenotypes, genotypes, allelic frequency, all of that stuff has just arisen through billions of years of evolutionary processes and adaptations that give us the beautiful world that we see today. And I really enjoy studying that and you know, observing that. So let's react to the video. Let's see. And I don't remember anything from this video. This occurred on whatever podcast about a year ago. So I'm just gonna roll through it and correct certain things that may be misinterpreted or that may be inaccurate or erroneous on both my and Andrew's behalf. And also, let me just say, if you believe in attraction, you believe oxytocin, dopamine, testosterone, all of those are evolutionary hormones. Evolutionary psychology is the authoritative field that deems that men and women find the things that they find attractive. That's how we know that. They're evolutionary adaptations that we have psychologically evolved so that we can mate with the partner's highest in mate value. Cues of fertility, fecundity, being attracted to waist to hip ratio, curves, breasts, facial symmetry, good teeth, small noses on women, small chins on women, masculine jawlines, muscles. All of that stuff is evolutionary psychology. So if you understand men being territorial, men getting jealous, men fighting over women, women having to compete for men, the whole concept of alpha males versus beta males, all of that is evolutionary psychology. Anything that you would agree with that women find desirable in men and that men find desirable in women or undesirable is evolutionary psychology. So by default, if you endorse the idea that those things are accurate guess what? You acknowledge evolution's validity as a phenomenon. Because if men and women evolved, then our brains evolved. And if we evolved to mate, then our brains evolved to identify what is more advantageous or disadvantageous. It's all evolution.
And Andrew, there goes an actual nature versus nurture argument. Because the natural aspect is they are attracted to it. But you have feminism. We have a culture like in the West that tells women that they don't have to listen to men, that they don't have to do certain things in relationships, and then it's reinforced all throughout the media, social media.
Well, let me argue with you a little bit here, Q.
Yeah.
And ask you, if it's a nature versus nurture argument, how do you know that the nature isn't just to be rebellious?
Because men are naturally attracted to agreeable women, and agreeable women are typically the ones who have the better relationships.
Are they?
Yeah.
See, okay, and right there, that was the first point of contention from Andrew. How do we know that women didn't just evolve to be rebellious? And I said because men are more attracted to agreeable women, and agreeableness, or people who typically are higher in agreeableness have better relationships. And he says, are they? Yes. All the psychological research shows that the healthiest relationship have both agreeable men and women, because if you're working together with someone, if you're in a relationship with someone, you guys have to be able to do what? Resolve conflict. And what do you have to be able to do? Demonstrate empathy, both affective and cognitive empathy. And if you are able to demonstrate cognitive and affective empathy and see from the other person's point of view, then you're more likely to apologize, you're more likely to be accountable, and you guys are more likely quicker to resolve the issue. So of course you got to be agreeable. You also have to be agreeable in the sense of when you like someone, their best interest becomes your best interest. You're trying to please that person. So you naturally become more agreeable with somebody that you like. It wouldn't make no sense for you to be with somebody and intrinsically your goal or objective is to please that person and you just want to be rebellious. You want to go against everything that they say. That's why when you're in the infatuation stage, you typically want to do everything with that person. You're obsessive. You want to be around that person. When conflict starts to seep through the cracks and you start to have a different perception of the person that you're dating, then of course you start to grow a little bit of resentment. You start to become more independent and you start to realize that this relationship is not something that you want. So you naturally will become more rebellious because you're no longer primarily concerned with pleasing that person or upholding the relationship, upholding the integrity of the relationship. So you might sabotage some. But no, we evolved to be more agreeable in relationships. And you'll find across every metric throughout all of the psychological literature that men and women who are more agreeable in their relationships have better relationship satisfaction and their relationships last longer. So that's a scientific fact. It would be counterproductive for women to be rebellious. Now, what you find is on a general scale, if we're having conversations like men and women have unhealthy relationships because feminism has infiltrated women's minds and put all of these negative attitudes towards men put all these negative attitudes towards the patriarchy in their minds, then you're looking at it in a general sense. We're not looking at it as an individual level. Like in a general sense, the general feminists and general men aren't romantically interested in each other. And you'll typically see that if you do take a woman who harbors feminist values or she has, a disdain for the patriarchy and she meets a man who she's attracted to, she'll be much more accommodating. She might even modify her views because her attraction to that guy will naturally dilute the abhorrence that she has towards, males. She'll start to see him as an individual. You can't engage in ecological fallacy and attribute what we know on a general scale about female attitudes and their contributions to the dissolution of relationships to individuals. Still doesn't override the individual findings that we discover scientifically in relationship stability and satisfaction between two individuals who actually get to know each other, who actually get to learn each other, and who are actually attracted to one another and want to make the relationship work. You can't do that.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that in modernity.
Yeah,
in modernity, most women are quarrelsome and men are still endlessly pursuing them.
And see, he says that it seems like in modernity, most women are quarrelsome and men are still pursuing them because we're not looking at individual relationships. Where have we seen in weird societies on a macro scale women being quarrelsome with men. No, we see countless examples of individual relationships or men who are interested in women that women aren't interested in those same men, and those women are quarrelsome. Or we see women talking shit about men that they had bad experiences with because it's coming from a place of resentment. It's coming from a place of being hurt, ruminating on negative dating experiences or negative relationship experiences that they overgeneralize and then attribute to men in general, when really when women say quarrelsome things or negative things about men, they only have one or two men in their mind that they're actually thinking about at the time that they make the statement. You got to know the difference.
In the West, because it's been infiltrated by feminist values and principles.
Yeah, but isn't feminism just another extension of evolution? So didn't we evolve to be feminists, just like all social structures are part of evolution as part of the selective process, right?
Possibly.
And see, I said possibly because the way he just framed it, didn't we evolve to be feminists? Yeah, possibly, because an aspect of feminism is men who can't get women will put women in positions that show that they care about those women. Like if you have a scientist or a politician who has never got women and now he has the authority to put women around him to give women their own independence or make their own money because he's more likely to feel that they'll appreciate him for it and subsequently give him some pussy for it, then yeah, the intrinsic motivation is to give women as much equality or equity as you think will make you more desirable to those women. So in that sense, by his framing, that's why I said possibly, because that framing would make sense from an evolutionary perspective. And if you understand evolution, then yeah, men are going to offer equality or equity to women if they feel that it would increase their chances of getting pussy from women. If I'm a guy working in a company, I want women in my company. Because what does that give me? Reproductive opportunity. That gives me access to women that I would have never had access to if I wasn't a boss. That would give me exposure to women that I typically wouldn't have exposure to if I wasn't in a position of power. So yeah, put some women around me. Put some women around me. Even if they work for me. Because if I'm the boss and I make the rules and I'm the shot caller, then I'm gonna assume that I'm gonna be desirable to women. I'm gonna assume that I can say what I want. I'm gonna assume that I can create my own rules and ethics, and I can assume that women are gonna find me desirable because I'm in a position of authority. I'm in a position of power. It's an indicator of provisional capability because I'm in charge or I have a prestigious or high profile position, and I'm attractive. Why not? Yeah, absolutely. So very well. And I do believe that if the majority of the world, especially countries where women are still second class citizens, if they were to engage in feminism, then the same thing would occur. We would start giving women more opportunities to make more money and be more independent. And of course, that's going to take away from the men who rely on women being second class citizens and who rely on being less desirable, that codes and ethics and laws that are in place that basically force women to listen to them or be beneath them. That's not going to be advantageous to them, but it is for both women and men who are more competent and who put themselves in positions in a free society to arise to the top of the sexual dominance hierarchy.
Possibly. But it isn't.
I've always found this to be a massive hole in the argument from the evolutionary purview.
Yeah, but
if the argument is, but feminism has indoctrinated women into being quarrelsome, then you're actually saying that men in the West have evolved to follow feminism, and so have women.
And that was an excellent point from Andrew, but as I previously stated, men chase pussy. So if a man feels that he has to simp in order to get pussy, see, simping is an evolutionary strategy, and the men who implemented feminism were essentially simps. See the correlation? The men who were on board for feminism were simps. Because they felt that if they were agreeable, and that's back to agreeableness. Remember I said agreeableness creates longer and more satisfactory relationships. As a man, if you show that you're in a woman's corner because you like her, if you want to improve your chances of engaging in coitus, then of course you're going to be on board with what women think they need or want. That's going to make them happy. That's going to result in you maximizing your chances of getting sex from those women.
Because that would be the natural order of selection, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to that, but it's bigger than the West. So when I say that in general, I mean there's still agreeable women in other cultures. There's still women who subscribe to listening to their men and being submissive in other cultures. So of course we have what I would call an anomaly here in the West, and evolution.
Feminism's winning.
Huh?
Even in other cultures, feminism's winning.
You think so?
Now that I don't agree with. Feminism isn't winning in other cultures. They just rescinded the rights of women in, I believe it was Afghanistan. Like, they just push women lower down the social dominance hierarchy. Women have less rights now than they did before. A lot of Middle Eastern countries, a lot of the Northern African countries that are predominantly Islamic, feminism is not thriving in those countries at all. Feminism does not exist in those countries at all. And this is where I would fundamentally disagree. Feminism is not winning in the Middle East. Feminism is not winning in China. Feminism is not winning in Russia. And feminism is not winning in the North African Islamic countries.
Yeah, name a culture it's not winning in.
The cultures that is not prevalent in,
Where?
such as
Where
the
are
Middle
those?
East, such as the Middle East.
No, it's winning all over the Middle East. It's winning in Iran, where transgenderism is allowed.
It's not winning in
winning in Afghanistan, where it's been liberated by the West.
See, and he's just factually incorrect. He's just factually incorrect at this point. It's not winning in any of the Middle Eastern countries. Just because in Iran they allow transgenderism, and I would have to fact check that. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure they are, but that is not indicative that feminism is winning, because feminism is the equality of opportunity for women. That's what feminism essentially is. And if there's no equality for opportunity present in these countries, if women are second class citizens, if women are not respected and held in regard the way that men are, it's not winning. So that's factually incorrect on Andrew's behalf.
It's winning everywhere. The number one complaint I hear from Muslims is that feminism has not stopped at the West, but is now going through the Middle East like crazy.
See, and that's anecdotal. The number one complaint I hear from Muslims is that feminism is infiltrated other countries as well. That's anecdotal. I mean, how many Muslims has Andrew heard this from? Has he had did he run a poll or a survey and ask, do they perceive feminism to be the case? And like I said, it's no more reliable than eyewitness testimony in court. Actually, it's less reliable because feminism is such a vague and broad concept that all types of biases can dilute the objectivity of what feminism actually is. So just because some Muslims told you that they feel that feminism has infiltrated the countries where feminism isn't supposed to exist, that has to be taken with a grain of salt. That would have to have some objective metric to be relied on in order to validate that claim. Like, you can't just take word of mouth just because he said that he's heard Muslims complain about things like that. I'm a certified relationship coach. I hear women complain about their men in my clientele all the time. Does that mean what they're complaining about is actually accurate? Is that an accurate representation or reflection of what's occurring in their relationships? No, it rarely is. I can tell you that it rarely is. Because when I probe and ask questions about why their men are doing certain things or behaving certain ways and how they contributed to it, normally there's a lot of accountability that they failed to insert into that equation that has resulted in their men behaving a certain way that they're complaining about their men behaving.
And they're doing everything they can to kind of push back against it, but they're still having to face off with it.
Well,
so the question
when you say that,
becomes, like, is this the natural evolutionary order?
well, when you say, well, it's not necessarily the evolutionary order. It's more of a fact that we just like agreeable women, and agreeable women, the more agreeable a woman is, the more likely the relationship is to work. So it's not a black and white thing. It's a gray area. So it's a gradation in terms of what relationships may function better than other relationships based on the level of agreeableness in the women that's in those relationships. When you speaking about it, you're making it more like a black and white thing. And evolution isn't necessarily about what's best.
Now, see the way I just broke that down? I just broke that down excellently. That was an excellent retort, because you have to be nuanced. You have to be intricate. And if you're thinking in black and white, about global phenomena, you're not going to be accurate. My point was that women evolved to be agreeable, and because men like agreeable women, because relationships function better when you have two agreeable people who care about one another and who are actually emotionally invested in one another. That's how the relationship is going to function optimally. That was my whole point. Women have evolved to be agreeable. Regardless of what's going on a global scale with feminism, with women who are single and who have men pursuing them that they don't want, men that they aren't attracted to, because that's the key factor. Women are not going to be agreeable to men that they don't want. Women are agreeable when they want you. When a woman likes you, you can get that woman to do anything for you, see the world through your eyes. She will be agreeable as fuck. That is on an individual level. You can't take feminism, right? You can't take feminism and say, well, it seems like women are being combative to men all over the world. Yeah, to men they don't want. In general, they're getting into arguments with men online. They're protesting men in free societies, or protesting the patriarchy, whatever bullshit these hoes are on. And that's not attributed to men that they actually want, though. You'll find that when a woman wants a man, like she actually wants that man, she's more likely to acquiesce to that man's value and belief system, even if she doesn't initially agree with some of the things that may be a part of his value or belief system. You know what I'm saying? Like she'll fall back. She'll be open to his point of view. He'll be able to explain things to her. She might get triggered, but ultimately she'll try to see things from his point of view, because the goal is to be agreeable. Women are much more compliant and conformative when they like somebody. They're much more open and receptive to new information when that information is coming from someone that they like. You're not going to get that, though, with feminists who are arguing a general concept of patriarchy, being misandrous, and just have this vitriol towards men in general because they think men are oppressing them. That's a general phenomenon. When you break it down to an individual level, when you actually get emotions involved, emotions that cloud judgment, like what happens when people like each other, when they're attracted to each other, that almost disappears completely.
Just about what's most adaptable. So if the West is indeed feminist, if feminism is
adapted to it.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. I'm saying
but if they've adapted to it, then that would be part of evolutionary cycle.
But then that would just mean that we would ultimately end up just becoming a feminist society.
We have become a feminist society.
I'm saying the argument you're making is more so from a moralistic perspective, and I'm saying evolution.
Well, I know I don't believe in evolution. I don't even think it's a thing, right? It's nonsensical to me because of natural selection being the mechanism. But
that's not the only argument.
First flaw in his argument. So Andrew says he doesn't even believe in evolution being a thing. It's nonsensical to him. That's an incredulous argument. Just because something doesn't make sense to you, well, you might want to reflect on if you understand it fully, rather than saying, well, this doesn't make sense to me. There are a lot of people who struggle with math because math problems don't make sense to them. But if they were more equipped or adept at understanding what the math problem is comprised of, the way they get to the solution, the steps to take, what is the variables in the equation, then that nonsensical problem would make sense almost immediately. And then he reduces evolution to just natural selection. That was the first error in why evolution is nonsensical to him. Evolution is nonsensical to everyone who only attributes natural selection to the mechanism in which evolution occurs. That's not the only mechanism, as I'm about to explain.
Within the evolution.
Yeah, that's not the only mechanism of evolution. There's more than that. It's not natural selection that would be the strongest.
Without natural selection, evolution doesn't work.
Yes, it does, because of genetic drift and genetic
Explain
mutations.
how it would work. That's all natural selection. Genetic selection.
No, it's not. No, it's not, Andrew.
Okay, so this is where he becomes inaccurate altogether. saying that that's all just natural selection. It's not all just natural selection. Natural selection is specifically adaptation, phenotypic adaptation to an environment. That's all natural selection is. So a polar bear's fur being white in the Arctic is natural selection. A whale's milk being high enough in fat that it almost floats in water, that's natural selection. They're adaptations. Genetic drift is not natural selection. Gene flow is not natural selection. Recombination is not natural selection. Sexual selection, non-random mating, is not natural selection. Mutations are not natural selection. These are all their own independent, individual mechanisms of evolution in which new traits, new alleles in a population can arise. You can't just clump the other mechanisms of evolution together and say, oh, that's just natural selection. That's just natural selection. That's scientifically incorrect. Gene flow, gene drift, recombination, sexual selection, and mutations are all individual mechanisms that are a part of evolution, because the definition of evolution is simply a change in allelic frequency within a population. That is the definition of evolution. The change of allelic frequency within a population. So you can see changes in allelic frequency within a population absent natural selection via gene flow, such as blue eyes in humans. That's not a naturally selected induced trait. Blue eyes in humans didn't come from natural selection. That came from gene flow. Humans consumed dairy in large quantities and gave rise to a mutation that became lactase persistence, or the lactase gene, that made it possible for us to metabolize lactase, which we once couldn't do. Now, they can be filtered through natural selection, but that doesn't make them natural selection, and that doesn't mean it's natural selection. We're talking about the mechanisms that exist that make evolution a thing. And natural selection is not the only one. It's the most famous one, but it's not the only one.
Natural selection?
No, it's not, because random mutations happen just randomly within populations.
That would be natural.
Yeah, that's not selection.
That is selection.
It's only selection.
It's selecting for the mutated gene.
It's selecting for the mutated gene, but you have to mate in order to pass it on.
Yeah, but if you're mating,
And see, I wish I would have been able to actually gather my thoughts better for this retort, because understand something. Science is its own domain. Scientific phenomena is its own domain. Philosophically, trying to reframe what is already well defined and established scientifically does not work. Like, you can't just reframe a scientific fact to mean what you want it to mean through philosophical reasoning. You can't do it. It doesn't work like that. No scientist is going to pay you any mind or take you seriously. You don't have the authority to delegitimize scientific concepts that have already been well established, well replicated, are accurate, and are predictive and falsifiable. You don't have the authority through philosophical reasoning to simply just delegitimize and say, well, that's what it is. It's all that. It's not. That's not how it works. And this is just, some fun cognitive sparring and for debate's sake. But at the same time, this is also why I typically don't like to debate, because I'm a person who has to establish truth, and I establish truth empirically, scientifically. So we can't have a conversation where you're going to acknowledge the fact that exists as it is, as it's been established, and you're just going to modify definitions and concepts so that you can be right. I can't have a conversation with you. I can't have a conversation with you, because you're just going to continue to move the goalposts and manipulate concepts to mean what you want it to mean, because you just want to be right. Like, there's a well-established framework of constructs, definitions, and concepts that exists within the theory of evolution that can't be modified according to a philosophical theory, or you trying to make sense of it philosophically, or falsify it philosophically, undermine it philosophically. You just can't. No philosopher has the authority to do that.
passing on the mutated genes, then that's natural, therefore it's natural selection.
No.
What do you mean no? How can it not be?
I just told you.
Again, natural selection doesn't mean what Andrew is saying it means in this context. He's saying that the mutations occur naturally and they're selected for after they occur, which means natural selection. The distinction is natural selection means adaptive based on environmental factors. That's what natural selection is. It's when a population has a specific adaptation for its ecological niche. That's what that means. Its ecological niche, the adaptations that it has to survive based on the climate, the terrain, the food that it eats. That's natural selection, not genes being selected for naturally. See, that's the distinction. He's saying anything to where the genes are selected for naturally is natural selection. And evolutionary theory defines natural selection as a very distinct mechanism that results in populations having adaptations that are conducive to survival in their niche, in their ecosystem. As I said, the terrain, the climate, the food that they eat. That's what natural selection is as a mechanism for evolution. Not the vague redefining of, oh, well, if it just occurs naturally and is selected for, then it's natural selection. That's not what it is. And I know because Andrew is a Christian, so he has a Christian point of view about the way life came about, which is fine. That's his faith. That's what he wants to believe. But I don't deny scientific realities or manipulate scientific definitions in order to make reality fit what I want my belief system to be. I don't do that. Like, I believe in a higher power, but I'm not going to say evolution doesn't make sense when, one, I understand it, and two, it's proven. It's one of the, if not the most well-established and robust scientific theory, which means it is supported and well substantiated by mountains and mountains and mountains and mountains and mountains and mountains and mountains of evidence. I'm not going to deny that it is a thing simply because I believe in a higher power. It clearly is a thing. I've done experiments that show evolution is a thing. I've seen real fossils. I understand the construct of evolution as a well-supported and well-substantiated scientific theory as it currently is today, as there are thousands of evolutionary biologists all over the world who come to the same conclusions as all the other evolutionary biologists around the world about evolution's validity and the fact that it maintains its validity through rigorous testing day in and day out all over the world from thousands of scientists globally, everywhere.
If it's not being selected for sexually, then it's not natural selection.
Yeah, but if people with these mutated genes are having sex and the mutated genes are continuing, then that would be natural selection.
Yes, but
And that's what I said. At this point, the whole argument about this is irrelevant because I didn't have the time to actually sit and think. Like I said, I didn't plan for this exchange to happen. I didn't have the time to actually sit and reflect on what he was actually saying. After I saw this video and I got time to think about it, I was like, oh, I understand what Andrew was saying. Andrew is saying that anything that occurs naturally and is selected for is natural selection. And then I'm like, that was never the definition of natural selection. Natural selection is just environmental adaptations seen in a population based on their environment, not the fact that they reproduce and pass the gene along regardless. And even so, that's still sexual selection, which is not actually natural selection in itself because every adaptive gene doesn't get passed down, and there's no guarantee that the genes that happen in recombination or in utero are going to be adaptive to the environment, and they still may show themselves. See, mutations, they just happen randomly. There's not no guarantee that you're going to have a mutation that's beneficial or detrimental to your environment. There are a lot of mutations that are neutral.
Answers, man. You ain't got the answers. You ain't got the answers. You ain't got the answers, Sway.
but things happen. Genes get eliminated. Genes are not selected for, so it's just kind of a random thing.
Yeah, that's all natural selection again.
That's one mechanism. That's one mechanism of like
selection is the key component to evolution. The gradual change of an entirety of a species over time. That is evolution.
Combined with
now you can have microevolution as well. I understand that as well. But the gradual progression of an entire species over time is the mechanism for this has to be natural. So it can't be anything else. What else could it be?
Nope.
See, again, so this is a fallacy. This is a fallacy. It is natural selection combined with recombination, with random mutations, with gene flow, with gene drift, with non-random mating. They all operate together. They all operate together to get what you see today. It's not one thing, because if it was one thing, then he'd absolutely be right. You wouldn't be able to explain the diversity of life simply by just natural selection. But evolutionary biologists knew this. People after Darwin, scientists after Darwin knew this and questioned this. They said there's no way that you can have all of this diversity of life just by natural selection. And they were correct. They discovered that there were also other mechanisms that contributed to the diversity of life that we currently see today. And as I said, I just named them, and I'll name them for you again so that the people watching this reaction can understand that it's not just natural selection. That's just one mechanism. The other mechanisms are gene flow, gene drift, recombination, non-random mating, and mutations themselves. Natural selection has to work with all of those other mechanisms of evolution in order to give it the gene pool that creates the diversity of life that we currently see today.
You're just choosing to clump them together. They're separate mechanisms. Genetic drift.
See how I said he's just choosing to clump them together? Because I understand. See, I don't debate within the frame of what someone says. If you ask me, would I agree that X leads to Y, or there's a correlation between X and Y, and you miscategorized X, you misclassified X, or X is not a thing, I'm going to acknowledge that X is not a thing to even correlate to Y or lead to Y. I'm not going to just accept because you say X is a thing that X is actually a thing. I'm going to look at if you're categorically correct, if you're scientifically correct in your classification of X, to know that it actually leads to Y. And this is an example of that. If I accepted Andrew's premise as natural selection is what he's defining it as, he would be correct. But natural selection is not what he's defining it as, and evolution is not what he's defining it as. So his whole argument falls apart on a faulty premise to begin with, because his conceptualization of what evolution is not accurate.
Genetic drift is its own mechanism. Genetic mutations are their own mechanism.
How do those spread?
Natural selection are their own mechanisms.
See, and he's saying, how do they spread? They don't have to spread. They contribute to the allelic frequencies that we see. They contribute to the differences in gene expression in populations, because that's all evolution is, a change in allelic frequency. I live in a neighborhood that has squirrels. I have never seen black squirrels before. There are black squirrels only on my property. There are black squirrels only in my apartment complex. I've never seen black squirrels before. How is it that squirrels are the standard color everywhere else that they exist, but only right here in my area within these 6-7 acres of my apartment complex, there are black squirrels? And I mean, the ratio is almost 50-50. Like for every standard colored squirrel, you'll see a black squirrel. That's evolution. And it's not evolution by natural selection, because natural selection has to confer some survival benefit. It's clearly sexual selection, because these black squirrels are mating with the regular squirrels and producing more black squirrels. And for those of you who have ever done the Punnett square, you know, with the recessive genes versus the dominant genes, then you know how these black squirrels are coming about. But the point is, there are black squirrels that exist in my neighborhood, and they don't exist anywhere else. That is still evolution. It's the same thing with eye color, which is why I used eye color as an example earlier in the video. I said eye color is one of those examples of it's just a mutation, but it's not natural selection. We see blue eyes not because natural selection gave us blue eyes, but gene flow gave us blue eyes. And blue eyes is the absence of melanin and is found in populations where there is no sunlight or lower levels of sun. It's just a mutation that has to do with less melanin in your eyes because there's lower levels of sunlight. That confers no survival advantage whatsoever. There is no conferred benefit to blue eyes. Not environmentally. Having blue eyes doesn't help you survive better in the cold. That would be natural selection. If blue eyes somehow helped humans survive better in the cold, then that would be natural selection. However, blue eyes exist outside of natural selection. They are not a result of natural selection. They're simply a result of mutation and gene flow.
How do those mutations spread?
In response to the environment.
Those mutations spread, and then when you have sexual intercourse with somebody, that mutation
But you
continues.
Yes, but you added the sexual selection.
Correct?
You added the sexual selection.
But now it's been selected for.
Yeah,
That's
but
the whole point.
Yes,
That's
but you
natural
just
selection. Now
you
it's
just
been selected for.
Yeah, if you say that, but that's not always the case. That's you.
I'm not saying it's always the case, but if it's not the case, that's also natural selection.
No.
So if they don't have sex, if there's
So see how I'm saying? No, I know he's incorrect, but I hadn't had the chance to actually get my thoughts together coherently and express how he's wrong. So that's one of the reasons why I made this video, because now I can point out that because I understand exactly what he's saying now. I didn't fully understand because my mind was racing and trying to focus on the podcast, and I don't know how we even got sidetracked and went on this tangent about the validity of evolution and what evolution was. But actually now I'm just listening to it, listening back and understanding what he meant. He's just saying, like I said, that anything that occurs naturally and is selected for is natural selection, but that's not the definition of natural selection. As I said, natural selection has to be an environmental adaptation that is distinct to that ecological niche. That's what it has to be. If it's not that, if it didn't arise as an environmental adaptation, e.g. the polar bear's fur being white for camouflage and the thickness of it being to keep it warm in the Arctic, then that's not natural selection. Every phenotypic trait or allele that's demonstrated in a population did not arise due to natural selection. Some are just mutations. They happen when other populations meet and they experience each other. So Homo sapiens made it with Neanderthals. That's a lot of gene flow occurring. That's a lot of gene flow occurring between those two species. Whenever two species that are different but similar enough to produce viable offspring to some degree mate, that's gene flow occurring. Evolution will occur by gene flow through those two processes, gene flow and mating. Also, gene flow can occur when we get parasites. Gene flow can occur when we get parasites. There are a lot of mechanisms and there are a lot of things that induce mutations, gene flow, gene drift, that lead to things being expressed phenotypically on us as a species and other species that can't be attributed to natural selection. They happen outside of natural selection.
there's no sex and the gene dies, that has been selected out. If they do have sex and the gene is there,
And that's not true either. Just because, like, genes don't just come and go and they're not always selected for sexually. The human genome is big as hell. Animal genomes are big as hell. Just because the gene doesn't show up don't mean it was selected out. That's not what that means. That's not how that works.
that has been selected in, right?
No, that's not the only way. I keep telling you that. You keep saying the same thing, and I'm telling you that's not the only way. That's not the only way it works. It doesn't have to be
I'm
selected
sure that
for.
that's the only way it can work.
No, it's not.
Otherwise, how does the gene continue if it's not selected for?
Because, as I said, genetic mutations and genetic drifts, they're not always selected for, but they become a part of evolution just because they're mechanisms that happen randomly by chance. Natural selection is its own mechanism. If it was the same thing as those, they wouldn't be considered different mechanisms. It would be called natural selection. It wouldn't be called
I
genetic
don't actually
mutation.
understand this argument, and maybe you can help me bridge the gap here.
I'll help you, bro.
Let us assume that there's a mutation which occurs inside of a species which is very small, right? This is a random mutation which happens, right? Now, if this mutation, if nobody with the mutation breeds, you agree with me that this gene is selected out, correct? Or this mutation.
Now, see, in response to this, yes, it is true that it would be selected out, but but mutations can still persist even if they don't show up. So that doesn't mean it was necessarily selected out. And also, the same mutations can re-arise again. See, he didn't realize this. If an animal has a mutation and that animal never reproduces, then that mutation is a variant of a gene that possibly already exists. And it's true that that variant, that specific variant, could end right there, but doesn't mean it was disadvantageous. Good genes get selected out too, or advantageous genes disappear too, or they don't get selected for too. But that same mutation can arise again. Yes, it can. The same mutation can arise again. In order for him to actually be correct, he has to be scientifically accurate. And if he's not scientifically accurate because he hasn't done the amount of scientific research on evolution to understand all the mechanisms, all the nuances of the mechanisms, all the conditions, circumstances, terms in which these mechanisms occur and they're applied, and just all the different combinations of how these mechanisms exist, how they, disappear, come back, etc. He can't be correct because he would have to actually do extensive research on evolution to understand these concepts. Philosophically, he's just trying to make the argument for why evolution doesn't make sense to him. And I understand. But I'm also saying that if it's nonsensical, then the reason it's nonsensical is because there's a lot that he doesn't understand about what evolution actually is and what it's classified as mechanistically. That's what I'm saying. Because he doesn't understand what the definition of evolution is, which is the change in allelic frequency within a population and the mechanisms by which these changes occur, which exist outside of natural selection, then evolution is not going to make sense to him. That was his premise. Evolution doesn't make sense to me because evolution by natural selection doesn't make sense. How do we get everything that we have from evolution by natural selection? And he's defining natural selection as all the mechanisms of evolution occurring naturally and then being selected for, when that's not how evolution works. Like, he limited his own perspective and understanding of evolution by reducing it and oversimplifying it. That's what he did. He diminished his own understanding of evolution by oversimplifying it and reducing it to something that it's much more complex than. And that's why it's nonsensical. Essentially, this is Andrew's fault because no one told him to define evolution as natural selection only and define natural selection as all the mechanisms of evolution that occur naturally and are selected for. No one told him to do that. So he contributed to his own misunderstanding, his own incredulity of evolution by the way that he attempted to redefine it and then say that it's not true based on his own modification to the definition and miscategorization of evolution.
Is selected now out, right?
Possibly.
Okay. Well, I mean,
that's why I said possibly.
Understand. How could it be selected in if the genes which cause the mutation do not pass genetically to the next generation. How?
Because genes are also affected in utero by the environment. So a woman can be pregnant, or an animal can be pregnant, and a whole new gene happens. There's a gene modification within in the DNA.
I agree.
I'm correct.
But let's say that mutation happens, and then there's no more reproduction past that. What happens to that gene?
Okay, so excellent question by Andrew. What happens to that gene? Well, what happens to that gene is that specific gene just wouldn't be selected for, but that doesn't mean that that gene wouldn't arise again, or that doesn't mean that that gene wouldn't become recessive. That gene can become recessive and still be there and never expressed, right? That gene can become recessive and be never expressed. Or it could be completely eliminated from the gene pool, that variant, altogether, and we never see it again. Or that variant can re-arise again, especially if the environmental conditions that gave rise to that gene in utero are still the environmental conditions. If another specimen of that species gets pregnant under the same environmental conditions, yet again giving rise to the same gene variant. Am I making myself, you guys understanding me? Am I making myself clear? That's what would happen. It could be recessive and it could never be selected for again. It could never show up phenotypically again. It could be completely eradicated from the gene pool altogether. Or, as I said, environmental conditions may give rise to certain mutations. And if another specimen, another female of whatever that creature is, gets pregnant under this insane environmental pressures that gave rise to that gene mutation, that variant of that gene, it could happen again because the conditions that initially gave rise to that gene are still present.
Depends on the gene, honestly.
No. How could a gene?
Wait, hold up, because there's pseudogenes. There's genes that exist that we still have that don't even work for what they were selected for.
Got him.
It just could become an inactive gene.
Got him. Okay. So y'all guys just heard me. Wait, hold up. Because there are pseudogenes. There are genes that we have that are no longer active. In humans right now, we have a gene where we could naturally produce vitamin C. Now we have to get our vitamin C from foods that we eat, drinks. But there was once upon a time where we naturally produce vitamin C on our own. We no longer do that. That's called a pseudogene, a gene that we still have, but it's not active. A gene that produces its own vitamin C in us, we still have, but it's no longer active. We don't produce our own vitamin C. We now have to extract vitamin C from the food we eat and some of the drinks that we consume.
Those genes couldn't exist absent the reproduction.
Or
yes, they could, because they could arise through mutation. If, for instance, if our ancestors who produced their own vitamin C, right? If the last ancestor that produced their own vitamin C died and that gene wasn't passed on, that mutation could arise again in the new population, the next generation of those related to our ancestors. That mutation could absolutely arise on its own again. And if nobody made it with that ancestor and it died, it could arise again because the environment, right, or our diet, right, whatever led to the mutation being necessary or just randomly coming about, it could still be present. We could keep producing similar mutations of the same gene or variants of the same gene over and over randomly without it having to be passed down sexually. We can do this. Animals do this all the time. He's oversimplifying it because he doesn't fully understand it.
mutation. You still say
mutation cannot spread absent reproduction.
Yes,
So
it
if you have a
can.
mutation
Yes, it
in
can.
small-
Yes,
so,
it
so
can.
you're saying, wait, so you're saying that an entire
Yes, it can, because mutations arise by random chance. Mutations arise by random chance and in response to environmental factors. So genes can absolutely arise absent natural selection.
species can have a random mutation happen to the entirety of the species?
But look, that's okay.
See, the random mutation doesn't have to happen to the entirety of the species. I just gave y'all examples earlier in this video. I said lactase persistence gene, that's not the majority of humans. The majority of humans still can't metabolize lactose. Blue eyes, the majority of humans do not have blue eyes, yet we still see blue eyes exist in the human population. There is an arsenic gene that allows humans who live around water with higher levels of arsenic, allows them to metabolize and digest arsenic better when arsenic is toxic if it's consumed, period. There is a population of humans who can metabolize arsenic. These are examples of evolution, but they don't occur in an entire population. They don't occur in even significant populations. They occur in smaller populations. These are still evolutionary responses to the environment. These are still evolutionary mutations that came about randomly, that have utility. And remember, every mutation doesn't have to be beneficial or deleterious. Some are neutral, some become pseudogenes.
Okay, here's
I'm
where
asking you directly, can a species have a random mutation absent reproduction, which happens to the entire species?
It doesn't have to happen to the entire species. This is another argument that I wish I would have had the time to reflect on and actually think about what he said. But again, I wasn't prepared to have this conversation, and it wasn't something that I was deeply trying to think about. I was just trying to engage in the rapid responses and then move on with the conversation. But yes, one, it doesn't have to be present in the entire population. And yes, there are genes that arise absent sexual reproduction.
no, because it's a
No,
yeah,
of course not. It's absurd.
Because
It's absurd.
because it's a gradual process. It wouldn't happen like that. It wouldn't happen.
Right, exactly, because it's being
would be-
selected for
it
or
would
not
just-
selected for.
It would be random. It would just be random. It would occur randomly. It wouldn't happen in a specific population like that. Just suddenly, it would be over.
That was country right there, just suddenly. But I actually had fun having this conversation though. Like, I like talking to people like Andrew because I like being asked questions that make me think. I just wasn't prepared to think in this instance. Like, I was in no shape, form, or fashion prepared to have this conversation at all. But I do like having these conversations. I like having inquisitive conversations. I like having to explain things. I like being caught with new ideas or new ways to look at things. Just in this instance, evolution is already a well-established, well-validated scientific theory that no amount of philosophical questioning or scrutiny or critique is going to invalidate. None. No philosophical reasoning, inquiry, scrutiny, or critiques are going to invalidate evolution as a scientific theory. It is too well substantiated, well replicated, and the evidence is ubiquitous. It has too large of a nomological network of evidence in order for it to be falsified or invalidated or delegitimized by philosophical inquiry.
It would have to be gradual and selected for, and without reproduction, it could not be selected for, and therefore it could not continue. There's no way around that. Absent reproduction, the gene dies. There's no fucking way around that anyway.
Absent reproduction, sexual selection, the gene dies. In some cases, not all the time. In some cases, not all the time, and sometimes they still get passed on just recessively, and sometimes they re-arise. So Yes. That's literally the rebuttal to that premise. Sometimes the gene gets pushed out the gene pool. Sometimes it's recessive and can never be expressed again, or we might not see it expressed again. Sometimes it becomes a pseudo gene, has no use, and then other times it absolutely does reoccur randomly.
I don't care if it's a plant. I don't care if it's an ant.
Yes,
I don't
there
care
is.
what it is. Well, how does the gene reproduce? How does it reproduce?
We're talking about mutations and drifts.
Yeah.
See, I keep saying mutations. I'm actually correct in this instance. I'm explaining to him. He's saying, how does the gene reproduce? How does the gene reproduce? Mutation. Genes arise randomly. Mutations. They just pop up. They just appear. Boom, new gene. Boom, new gene. Like, there are three ways that this can occur that Andrew does not know. You have recessive inheritance, you have mutational recurrence, and you have pseudogenization. Those are three ways that genes can be found in a population absent reproduction or absent natural selection.
It's only because you're stuck on natural selection and that's how you're framing it. You're
These
choosing to
things
frame it as
can't
natural
operate
as
outside
natural.
of purview of natural selection. They can't. It's
And
not
I'm telling-
possible.
I'm-
These
it's
things are
not
being
impossible.
selected or not selected for.
It's not impossible. There's plenty of evidence that shows that it actually can.
Okay.
I can
Give me a
send you
demonstration of
some
when
studies
an
if you want.
entire species, when an entire species gets a mutated gene, which spreads throughout the species without reproduction.
Oh, could you repeat it for me, bro?
Yeah. Can you tell me, give me a single example of a mutated gene which spreads throughout an entire species absent reproduction?
Absent reproduction, an entire.
All the mutations that occur through gene flow, gene drift, mutations in sexual recombination. Because I've been fully explaining, and now I know I keep reiterating myself, but I just want to keep clarifying that his argument was faulty from the jump because of the fact that he defines natural selection as any of the mechanisms of evolution occurring naturally and being selected for, and then saying that if it's not selected for, then it's no longer a part of the gene pool. And that's not true because millions of animal species exist, and in certain niches where climates are different, geography is different, food sources are different, parasites are different, predators are different. All of these things contribute to the arising of mutations. And as I just said, recessive inheritance, mutational recurrence, and pseudogenization are all things that contribute to evolution. Mind you, once again, I need to reiterate, the definition of evolution is the change in allelic frequency within populations. That's all it is. That is all it is. Natural selection is one of the ways that you get a change in allelic frequency within a population. Gene drift is one of the ways that you get a change in allelic frequency within a population. Gene flow, mutations, sexual recombination, sexual selection, non-random mating, they're all mechanisms in which you get a change in allelic frequency within a population. That's why they are mechanisms of evolution that is defined by a change in allelic frequency within a population. Choosing to modify that or redefine that however you want, you're not going to have an accurate definition of evolution. And then you can distort and manipulate and play with evolution and try to invalidate it however you like. But if you misdefine evolution, miscategorize evolution, then your whole argument falls flat because that's not what evolution is.
It spreads throughout a species, absent reproduction. How about genes that occur specifically in a population, absent reproduction, such as
What?
the lactase gene?
Okay, and could that gene continue absent reproduction?
It could.
Yes, it absolutely could continue absent reproduction, because if the lactase persistence gene, the gene that allows humans to tolerate lactose, metabolize lactose, if the last human who had lactose tolerance died and humans continued to consume dairy, the lactase persistence gene would arise again. Do you guys get what I'm saying? If the last person who had the lactase persistence gene was to perish, but humans continued to consume dairy, eventually the subsequent consumption of dairy would then again result in a new lactase persistence gene that could then be, sexually reproduced or passed down. And I don't even think the lactase gene is passed down to where just because your father was lactose tolerant means you're going to be lactose tolerant. There are parents who are lactose tolerant and their children are still lactose intolerant. There are people who are lactose intolerant and their children are lactose tolerant. So, as I said, his argument falls flat because mutations occur and they result from a multitude of factors that can give rise to new mutations.
Continue absent reproduction by gene mutation.
See, I just explained it.
You're just saying that there could be another mutation which is like this mutation.
Exactly. Exactly.
So like no matter what, all of this is going to come back.
Yeah,
All of this
exactly.
is going to come back to the gene itself, or whatever the mutation is in the gene, cannot continue absent reproduction of the people with those genes. That is natural selection. The idea here is that this gene, whatever the mutation is.
See, he said that is natural selection. That's not natural selection. Natural selection is an environmentally induced adaptive trait that is seen within a population that allows them or confers them a survival advantage or benefit for that ecological niche. That is natural selection. What he is saying is natural selection is not natural selection. Natural selection is a distinct mechanism that results in a conferred survival advantage or benefit to a species within a specific ecological niche. It is adapted to live in the environment that it lives in. That is natural selection. Mutations are not natural selection. Gene flow, gene drift, non-random mating, recombination are not natural selection. They're separate mechanisms of evolution. So he's incorrect. That is not natural selection.
Selected for because that is what's being reproduced. This is always the center point for the idea of evolution.
I got to give Q the final word on this, and then I got to move it on.
But I mean, it's simply put, if it was natural selection, then it would be classified as natural selection. It's not natural selection. You're just
okay. Well, let me ask one more question.
Andrew, I got that.
Real quick.
Brian, funny. It was. I mean,
The irony of the world was nuked tomorrow. We all nuked each other out of existence. Okay, with nuclear bombs. Mm-hmm. That is natural selection, correct?
If we all
nuked each other, why no, that's not natural selection. That's not natural selection. So you see what I'm saying? Like, no, it's not natural selection. Now, I get what he's asking, but as I said, his whole premise was faulty to begin with. No, that's not natural selection, because nuking each other is not giving a rise to adaptive or conferred survival advantages on a phenotypic and genetic level based on the environment. That's natural selection. That's natural selection.
Each other?
Yes.
Why would that be classified as natural selection if we?
Yeah, exactly. Why on earth would that be classified as natural selection? Why would he say that? Andrew is funny, man. He hilarious. He funny. This is my guy though. Andrew, my guy. Andrew be getting some hilarious debates on the internet still. I still see him pop up on my feed. Even though I haven't been as active on YouTube, I still see him pop up, putting people in their place philosophically and religiously from his moral code of ethics. But this was a good exchange. I just wish I had been more prepared to elucidate on a lot of the things, and I just wish that if my mind wasn't rushing, as much as it was, that I was actually able to digest his questions and understand them better and understand where he was coming from better, because I wasn't able to actually focus on what he was trying to say. And that's a large reason why, other than the fact that I wanted to clear up the miscategorizations and the misdefining evolution and actually help people understand what evolution actually is and the way it works and what it's defined as scientifically. That this is why I did this video.
What else could it be?
Why would that be?
Because evolution meant that we built nukes and that we evolved towards nuking each other off of planet Earth. That's what was selected for. The genes and everything else that led to us building the nukes and thus nuking each other off of planet Earth, all of that led from evolution, right? We evolved to do this.
That would never happen because evolution is about reproduction and survival, so it wouldn't evolve to nuke each other.
Well, I think that you and I have a big distinction then.
Brian crazy.
For the Venn diagrams to start popping up high.
Brian crazy. Hey man. That was interesting. That was funny. And he said, you and I have a very different idea of what natural selection is. And yes, we do. I have an accurate definition of what natural selection is. And you try to look at it from a philosophical purview. And as I said, you can't validate or falsify scientific truths through philosophical reasoning. You just can't. Because the epistemological methodology in ascertaining the validity of a scientific phenomena is the scientific method. The scientific method is about testing what you observe empirically and seeing if you replicate the results enough for it to become predictable. It's a model. Evolution theory is a model, and it works. So no matter how much you logically or philosophically try to scrutinize it or critique it, you don't have the authority to invalidate it, falsify it, or delegitimize it. You just don't. Like, continuing to just ignore it and say that it's not real is like that clip from Nightmare on Elm Street with Freddy Krueger, the latest one that came out, I believe it was like in 2009, where the dude Dean was standing up saying, "You're not real, you're not real, you're not real." And he was in his head saying, "I'm real enough to do this." And he stabbed him in the neck and killed him. Yeah, like just because you say it doesn't make sense, it's not real. It doesn't make sense. It can't be a thing. That doesn't mean it's not a thing, because every time you say that it's not a thing or it's not real, there are thousands of evolutionary biologists all over the world, thousands of doctors all over the world who are working with evolution and proving that it continues to exist, continuing to substantiate and replicate and produce results that are overwhelmingly, demonstrably evident, of evolution's existence. Appreciate you guys tuning in to yet again another QPO reaction. You guys know I'm the dopest, most intellectual, empirically and scientifically based, objective and entertaining mind on social media. So make sure y'all hit that like button, that subscribe button, and continue to share my content so that y'all can keep up with every dose of the QPO that I drop here on YouTube. I catch you guys on the next dosage. Stay QPO'd, stay dangerous.